You think you've got to learn bookkeeping in order to have bookkeeping for your company, and it's just not true. Really very simple. When it comes to running your business, there are only two things that have anything to do with the financials in your business. All this thing needs to do is take this information, which if you remember it, so it groups all the travel expenses, it groups all of the salary expenses, it groups all of the... So here's the thing about bookkeeping, right? You think you've got to learn bookkeeping in order to have bookkeeping for your company, and it's just not true. There are bookkeepers out there that do this work. What you need to know as an entrepreneur is which ones do you trust and what should you be looking at as an entrepreneur? What do you need to understand about the concept of bookkeeping? It's a lot more straightforward than you think. So I'm just going to do a little primer here for entrepreneurs about what exactly is bookkeeping doing? Like, what is it providing me? And it's really very simple. When it comes to running your business, there are only two things that have anything to do with the financials in your business. I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but only in the number of accounts we're talking about. There is usually a checking account, and there is usually a credit card. And if you're a business that just has a checking account and a credit card, and those are the only two things, then this is for you. Because what bookkeeping is not as mysterious as it sounds. Picture an engine here. I don't know that I can even draw an engine, but let's pretend, oh my God, that looks like a, don't even. I don't even know what it looks like, but it's an engine, okay? And the engine is provided by any number of things. It could be an Excel spreadsheet. It could be a bookkeeping system like QuickBooks or Xero, or you could do it manually in your head. But all it's doing, all it needs to do, and if you're an entrepreneur who really only uses bookkeeping or needs to pull things together for your tax accountant, you'll definitely recognize this. All this thing needs to do is take this information, which if you remember, it comes on a piece of paper, and there's a date, and there's an item, and there's a dollar amount. Date, item, dollar amount. Date, item, dollar amount. And it adds up and it says, here's the total you spent, and here's your beginning balance, and here's your ending balance. Okay, it pretty much just provides that information, which is kind of useless to you as an entrepreneur. You can't see anything from that. And my lesson to entrepreneurs is you want to know a couple things. How are things trending in my business over time? How much money am I making and how much money am I spending? And how am I doing versus those expectations I had? Context is the only thing that makes your numbers meaningful to you as an entrepreneur. So all this engine's doing with your checking account and your credit card account is taking those lines of detail, which are just monotonously long, and turning it into something where you can see the types of expenses you have. So it groups all the travel expenses, it groups all of the salary expenses, it groups all of the software expenses, so on and so forth. I don't need to keep going, but you get the idea. And it groups our income, okay? But the other thing it does is it also takes all those individual dates, which just is a ton of data, and turns it into information because it gives you the ability to now drop it into a month. So you can put January here, February here, March here, and all of a sudden, instead of needing to add up 3 January expenses and 2 of them are travel and 1 of them is meals, or 1 of them is salary, let's say, it'll automatically drop them in here and say, hey, when I look at all the data that you've got in these statements, you had $200 of travel in January, you had $100 in February, you had $250 in March. You had salary of $1,000, $1,000, $1,000. You had software of $200, $300, $150. You had income of, $20,000, $10,000, $5,000. Because then you've got an actual report, often called a P&L by many entrepreneurs, that is true, that tells you month by month what the story of your business is. So this is the only reason it's important. But here's the thing, how do you get that? right? That's where the bookkeeper does all that sausage making stuff that you don't need to learn about. But there are a few things you need to know to check on to make sure you can rely on those reports, okay? And I want to cover those now. And the place that you go is very simply to the bookkeeper, and you want them to send you or show you each month. This is where you make sure everything's being done correctly. This is all you have to look at. You want to ask them for each bank reconciliation, and it should be each month that they're doing it for you, and each credit card reconciliation. Because remember, this is the only two places anything happens with the money in your business. That's it, these two. And what you want to see very specifically is what we called any uncleared transactions. And let me explain what that means, okay? It's a lot simpler than it sounds. But if your bookkeeper tells you, I have reconciled this bank account through June of this year, through 6/30 of this year, okay? Then on the reconciliation report that he or she has to create, it's a natural outgrowth of QuickBooks. It's what you're paying for. Don't let them tell you you're not. What you want to ask them is, are there any transactions older than 6/30 that have not been reconciled? Okay, this is where things go south. And if you look at the report they're going to give you, you'll be able to see those very clearly on the report. It'll literally show and say unreconciled. And what can happen is, if your bookkeeper's not really a bookkeeper who learned through truly taking bookkeeper courses. For example, this is the kind of thing where a VA who may take on bookkeeping for somebody, or an EA might take on bookkeeping but really not have the background, they're not going to know to look for these and make sure they clear. But what'll happen is, if these pile up on you, right, it can be hundreds of thousands of dollars in expenses or in income that aren't real, but yet they're showing on your reports because they've let them sit unreconciled. So this is something you want to check for. If there are any unreconciled transactions, your bookkeeper should be able to explain exactly what it is in plain English that makes sense to you. 9 times out of 10, if there are a bunch of unreconciled transactions, they haven't really done the reconciliation, and you probably need a new bookkeeper. Okay? So this is why I tell you it's not complicated. You don't need to know how to do bookkeeping. You need to know what question to ask. And the question to ask is, when as you did do the last bank reconciliation, it should be as of last month, always. Don't let that go longer than a month. And are there any uncleared transactions? And depending on how much you know, trust, love your bookkeeper, I'd actually look at the report as opposed to just asking them. That's it. A little thing you can do as an owner to make sure that you're being well taken care of, and why it's really worth it to do due diligence on your bookkeeper. This can be something you screen for when you're interviewing a bookkeeper to make sure they really understand what this means and why it's important. Have them explain it to you. Have them explain it to you in plain English and see what they say. And then you got somebody who can answer this question and go, oh yeah, I check for those. I clear them every month. If I don't know what they are, I figure out what it is and get them off of there before I call it reconciled. You're in good hands. If you have somebody who goes, well, they didn't show up on your statement and they're not really hurting anything, run as fast as you can. Those are the two kind of reactions that I would have to an answer to this question, which you should be asking every month if you're an entrepreneur. Hope that helps. If you found it helpful, like, subscribe, come back for more. You're going to find a lot more of these tips for entrepreneurs about what they need to know about bookkeeping as opposed to what bookkeepers need to know about bookkeeping. I hope that video was helpful, and I hope you subscribe to my channel for more information on finances in your business.